I am so excited about our next session because this is going to be a slightly different format. We are going to have a fireside chat this evening, and what's exciting about it is that you all may have seen the interview go around with Jeff Kaplan and really getting everybody to know what made Blizzard so great. And that's exactly what we're going to find out this evening. So please welcome Alexander Lee and Paul Sams, who are going to dig into protecting developers from business pressures, lessons in the heyday of Blizzard. So please welcome.
Thanks, Val. Also, I want to give a shout out to Anthony Mendoza, our host for the last debate. He's a business development executive at Xsolla, and he did a great job. Thanks, Anthony. All right, Paul, thank you. It's a pleasure to join you on stage, and Paul and I have talked about this topic quite a bit over the last few weeks, but this is actually my first time meeting him in person as well, so this is a historic moment right here. Paul is currently the president and chief operating officer of Certain Affinity, but we're here to talk about his former role as the chief operating officer at Blizzard Entertainment, which is where Paul served between 1996 and 2015. Is that right? I was born in 1995, so that's quite some time. Now, oh God, maybe I should have said that.
It's all good.
So we're here to talk about the heyday of this legendary gaming company, and about the key business practices that leaders like Paul implemented in order to create the behemoth that Blizzard is, or I should say Activision Blizzard is today. Before we jump in, Val referenced the podcast episode that Jeff Kaplan recorded on the Lex Friedman podcast a few weeks ago. Just really quick show of hands if you have listened to that episode or if you've seen clips of it on social. Okay, well, this is the first and only time I'll ever be recommending a 5-hour podcast episode to anyone, but you should listen to this podcast because it's fascinating. Jeff goes into the history of Blizzard, the key practice that helped protect, the key firewalls that helped protect developers at the company from the mounting business practices as it scaled up, and also the people at the company who were responsible for building this firewall. And Jeff he's pretty political in his talk. He doesn't name check too many people, but one person who he specifically calls out is Paul, as one of the people who was not necessarily coming from the game developer side of the company, but still had developers' best interests at heart. And it's that shout out in this podcast that we're going to be elaborating on in this conversation. So, Paul, I think maybe to start off, we should define what exactly this firewall was. When we talk about a firewall between developers and business pressures at a company like Blizzard, how is this implemented and why is it important?
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. To answer the question, I think from the earliest of days when I joined Blizzard, Blizzard was always a developer-focused, developer-driven company. The company's only goal was to make great games and to make their customers happy, their players happy, right? I mean, we wanted to make fun games that kept people engaged and that you could play with your friends. And so when I came on board, one of the three founders, Alan Adham, said to me, listen, I want you to oversee running the company so that I can make games. I want to focus on making games. I'm tired of trying to do both, and I don't want to do the business side of it. But what I need you to do is I need you to be our human shield. With our parent company at the time, Blizzard had sold a couple of years earlier, and even though that company was one of the better parent companies that Blizzard had, they were a publicly traded company. They had a desire to achieve certain financial targets. They weren't necessarily game people, and they had a different view of what was important. And I think it's not that what they thought was wrong, it's different. They had different priorities. For Blizzard, it was all about the games. It was all about making the best games in the world. And so from the very first day that I arrived, that was how I was indoctrinated. Be our human shield, protect us, allow us to prioritize what matters, allow us to have the developers focus and to not be distracted, to not be bothered by all the business pressures, but rather you carry those, bring on people to help you carry those, and allow us to be singularly focused on greatness.
So, how did this become more of a challenge as Blizzard scaled? And I'm curious, in your tenure at the company, if there was a moment or a specific period when you saw the cracks in the facade start to appear, or maybe that's a bad way to phrase it, but you really just saw the difficulties in maintaining that firewall start to express themselves more thoroughly.
The firewalls were necessary from the get-go. We had, I think, 6 different parent companies during my tenure there. And with each of them, when they would come in, the management of that group would always come in and they'd have a lot of business background. They'd understand traditional business principles. If you were a grad student, had an MBA, there's a certain playbook that you learn and that you are going to try to employ when you're running a company or in a position of authority and leadership. And so they all came in as successful people in these other businesses, and they came in and thought, well, why don't we take what Blizzard is doing and expand it? Let's really amplify it. Let's try to find ways to generate more revenue, more profit. Let's do more of what you guys are doing. Just replicate it. It's going to be fine. You guys will be fine. And while that may be a neat idea, the reality of it is Blizzard was not a company that did a lot of different games, as we all know, right? It was a limited number of games, but we wanted to make sure that everything we did was great and that we never let our players down. And so when each of those companies would come in, that was where me and certain of our my other teammates on the non-development side of the house really had to spend a lot of our energy. Anytime a new group came in, we had to re-educate them. We would always talk about we have to re-educate the new parent on how things really work because they don't get it. And so we would have a tremendous amount of headbutting and fist fighting, not literally but figuratively, although maybe sometimes you wanted to, and to help them understand. But we really had to work hard to convince them that what we did, while unorthodox, was the right thing for the game. And if we did the right thing for the game, what that means to me and what it meant to Blizzard is that we're doing the right thing for the players. And the players then voted with their wallets. So if you do right by them with the best games, you don't have to worry about, at least in the case of Blizzard during that period, we didn't have to worry about whether or not we were going to hit our numbers. We almost always hit our numbers. Why? Because our players trusted us. They knew we were going to deliver something great to them. And that was what the non-development side of the house, our sole goal was to protect the developers to do what they do best. People don't buy business models. They buy games. They buy fun. They buy incredible experiences with their friends that they can tell stories about. And so our goal at every step was to re-educate the new parent company. We would then release a game, and every single time the result was this. Oh, okay, this is pretty good. This blew all of our numbers out of the, blew them all out, and so, okay, well, you guys do some more of that. And then they would leave us alone reasonably, and then it allowed us to focus on just Blizzard and our players, as opposed to thinking about the parent.
So, maybe this is getting, so you left Blizzard in 2015, and I think that, that really was the heyday period of the company. But at what point did that pattern shift? Because you said you guys you put out a great game, the business people, the higher ups would be like, oh yeah, you know what you're talking about. And then they would kind of forget. They'd start to put the pressure on. You would stand in the middle. Another new game would come out. They'd be like, oh yeah, you know what you're doing. At some point, that cadence, it wasn't enough for the business people just to be like, hey, look at our track record. We made great games. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think where the biggest change occurred was in the 2008-2009 timeframe. Our then parent company, Vivendi, acquired Activision. And then they brought Activision and Blizzard together and combined them into one entity, creating Activision Blizzard. There were two operating groups within that. One was Blizzard Entertainment, one was Activision Publishing. The team that served in that kind of oversight role of Activision Blizzard was a lot of the Activision executives. They were already a publicly traded company. They already knew how to deal with the street. They knew all those things. And so the thought processes with Vivendi was, well, those folks can run that. Blizzard can focus on doing what Blizzard does. And hopefully, the leadership of Activision Blizzard will help amplify, right, what Blizzard's doing and help them in a variety of ways. And so, and while there was benefits, believe it or not, a lot of people don't think there was, but there were some benefits. I think a lot of us learned a lot because that was the first parent company we had that was truly in the game industry. It was the first one that actually had success in the game industry. And so there were things that we were able to glean from them that were valuable. At the same time, there was very different cultures, right? Blizzard was game first, player first, and if we do the right thing, then they'll vote with their wallet. So we're going to hit our numbers and we're going to blow our numbers out. But again, priority one was making great games and doing right by our players. Whereas on the Activision side, they were much more of a traditional business, and they thought to themselves, well, let's build our budgets. Let's say, look at what the market is doing. What are the big things? Do we want to chase those or not? What is going to be the big franchise that we can build? It's going to be a annualized $1 billion revenue generating franchise. And we didn't look at it that way. Again, players vote with their time and their wallets when you do the right thing by them. And they were like, well, yeah, of course, but we've got these numbers, and this is the way that you do it in real life and business, and so this is the way we think you should do it. And so we spent a lot of time kind of trying to learn each other's languages, if that makes sense, and trying to understand each other's point of view. And even though the Activision side was challenging at times, to say the least, at least while I was there, because we were delivering the results that we were, they reluctantly kept their hands mostly off. There were certain changes that occurred that changed kind of how Blizzard was operating in some respects. I won't go into naming, much like Jeff didn't, but there was a turning point where the company brought in an individual, believe it or not, that actually very much changed a lot of things. It was after I departed. It was a person I interviewed, and I absolutely positively, because the role would have reported to me had I not departed, I interviewed the person a year prior to my departure, and I said, absolutely not. And then before I was leaving, they still had an open position for that role, because the demands I was putting on it was they had to be a gamer. We were not going to bring in a head of finance that was not a hardcore gamer, that didn't understand the causality of the decisions and the recommendations that they were making to the company and the leadership and the developers. If they don't understand it, if they don't live it, then they're not going to understand. And they're going to say things like, well, why don't you farm out all the QA? Why don't you farm out all of the customer service? Why don't you do these different things? Because it's a way to save money. It's a margin increasing type of play. But the reality of it was, if you look at like customer service during that period of time, for World of Warcraft in particular, we treated customer service like a product. We believed that not only did we have to deliver a great game and a great game that was fun and engaging and kept everybody really excited and everything, but we also said they're going to be in a subscription-based MMO, there's going to be challenges. And as a result, we said we need to make sure that their experience, even out of game, is spectacular. We said, I put at a time, at one point I said, I want us to be the #1 customer service company in the world, regardless of industry. And because we wanted our players to know that not only were we prioritizing a great game, but a great experience. And I think, I spent, for our first finance leader, I spent 2 years looking for that person. His name was Mark Almeida. I will name him. He is the best CFO in this industry, period. Hands down, nobody's close. And it's because he always prioritized the game over everything else, our player experience over everything else, because he knew and he believed. He got to see all the numbers behind the scenes that nobody else saw. And he saw when we did right by them, they always did right by us. They trust us. They knew that if we were shipping a Blizzard title, they could count on it being great, because we were not going to compromise. We were not going to ship a game before it was done. If it wasn't good enough for our players, we'd cancel it. And that's how we rolled. We were very focused on doing the right thing for the games, the right thing for our franchises, the right thing for Blizzard Blue, the Blizzard Blue logo, and our players.
So, Paul, I want to take this moment to mention an anecdote from Jeff Kaplan's podcast, because I think it's exceedingly relevant to what you just shared. Also, again, he didn't name anyone here. We're not naming anyone here, but we're talking about things that happened at the company. Jeff shared an anecdote where when he was making Overwatch 2, he was called into the office of the CFO of Blizzard at the time, and that person told him, you need to hit X benchmark. They bleeped out the number, or 1,000 people will be laid off and it's your fault. And Jeff said this, sorry for the language, but Jeff said this was a fuck you to him. And he in clear terms said that this interaction was the beginning of why he decided to leave Blizzard when he did. So I think, you talked about doing the right thing. I think it's very clear that interaction was not the right way to go about this. What the CFO was attempting to do was to communicate business pressures to developers. There was no firewall there. So I want to talk about that anecdote and just ask you, what went wrong here? What is the correct way, or what would have been the right way for this person to try to communicate these pressures to the developer team without just torching them the way that they did?
So what happened there was, you can say that the person was just trying to provide him insight as to what the ramifications would be if you didn't achieve certain numbers or what have you. And so you could say that that's what it is. But what it was, from my perspective, was a means to try to intimidate him into doing what it is he wanted to achieve, whatever the goals were at the time at that point. And the way that it occurred in the past, during that window of time that we're speaking about, is that there were not mandates that were made by the business and operations side of the house. I was the number 2 guy in the company, and I can tell you this: if you go and you speak to the developers that were there during that time, I think that you would find a pretty universal comment that we would have conversations with the developers. We would not mandate things to them. And that's an important distinction, because at the end of the day, Blizzard's approach was we only hire gamers. And on our dev teams, every single one of those people, when we were determining what games we were going to make, it's what they wanted to play next. It's what they wanted to make. And so my view was, and the team that I assembled around me, was that the developers know better than us, in all candor. You guys, as developers, know what makes great games better than me. I play games, but I don't make games, and that's a big difference, right? I can think I know something, but I don't know it. I haven't been in those trenches that they have been. Even though I play games, those people that are on the development teams are playing 10, 20 times more hours in a year than the business people. Well, not all of them. We had a lot of business people that played a lot. That was part of the success, was that they also understood what made what we did special. And so I think in that circumstance, it would not have occurred, in all candor, because Jeff, if you know him, he is one of the best designers that has ever walked this earth. And he's also one of the best people that has ever walked this earth. He is a wonderful human being. And I cannot fathom a scenario where I would ever say that to Jeff, right? Because Jeff can walk circles around me as it relates to making games, and around me in a lot of things, right? He is a brilliant guy, and he understands what players want far better than most. And so having conversations and saying, listen, these are some of the things we're trying to achieve that we think would be valuable to our players, that would be valuable to the company, that would put us in a position to make even more investment here. We would say those things to the development leaders, but then it was a dialogue. And at the end of the day, there were many times the developers said, We're just not doing that. That is bad for the players. That is bad for the game. That is bad for the franchise. That's bad for the company. And we, even if we didn't fully agree, we would say, all right, well, we understand. And sometimes we'd go back and have the conversation some more. Sometimes we would have a better point that made our point, and they were like, oh, okay, actually, we didn't see it that way. And there might have been a compromise. But at the end of the day, Blizzard is a developer-led company, right? When Mike Morhaime was promoted to CEO and I was promoted to be head of business operations when Alan stepped down in 1998, I actually thought that it was going to be me that was going to take that top job. This is not something I've actually said, but I thought that based on things that we were talking about. And Alan sat me down and he said, listen, you are qualified to do it all, but Blizzard cannot have somebody that is not a developer be its leader. You're going to do it with Mike, but Mike has to be in front because Mike is truly a developer, and Blizzard is a developer-driven company and a developer-run company. And honestly, I'd be happy to be number 2 to Alan Adham or Mike Morhaime any day of the week because they're some of the best and brightest in the business. They've done things that very few have done. And it was a privilege to have the opportunity of being their business partner, to helping to scale and grow the business, to support the incredible things that they did. And, I think the companies that make the best games are developer-driven. I really do. I believe it with all my heart. And as a result, I viewed it in the non-development side of the house, we all viewed it as we have to protect it at all costs and find ways to amplify what they're doing and provide even better player experiences than maybe even they contemplated. But at the end of the day, it is all about servicing the game and all about servicing the player.
So I think that statement of being developer first and the importance of that really gets to the crux of something that we discussed the other day, which is that developers, or at least the pool of developers that Blizzard was ideally tapping into for its games during its heyday, are not, they're kind of the same population as gamers themselves. So there isn't a huge overlap between developers and players, at least in terms of the culture and the way that they approach games. And I think this is important because players can tell when developers have a gun to their head. They can tell when that 1,000 layoff threat is being leveraged and developers are making a game with their back to the wall. I mean, I'm saying this as a statement, but I want to turn it to you as a question. Do you believe that players, customers, can tell when that firewall breaks down on the front end?
I think the Blizzard player community could, because the Blizzard player community was so locked in on being part of that Blizzard community, understanding the developers. The developers were on the front lines. They were the ones that were out in front, whether it was at BlizzCon, whether it was in interviews or what have you. Those were the stars of the show, and you could see, I could see, because I knew so many of them for so many years. I would watch everything, as you can imagine. After I left, I still bleed Blizzard blue in my heart. It was the single most incredible accomplishment for me personally, besides my kids in my life, was being part of Blizzard and being part of building what Blizzard became. And I just think Blizzard is something that is unique and different, and I think it's something that will be very hard to replicate. There was a run of 17 games in a row that were either Game of the Year or Expansion of the Year. I don't think that has been or will ever be done, and it was because we had the best, in my opinion at the time, some of the best developers in the world, and they were unleashed to do what it is that they wanted to do, to make the games that they dreamed of. And because they were all gamers, I think that our players could relate. They could see it. They could see the change in their face, their demeanor when they would be talking. They could see the pressure was different. And I think the best way to unlock that incredible capability that the team had was to try to take all those other business pressures away from them. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about the financial results were with the game developers. I mean, they saw it because we had a very lucrative profit-sharing plan that paid developers incredibly well, some of the probably the best in the business. And it's because, again, they're the people that are bringing the magic. And so I think that the players could see it over time. That's not to say that Blizzard isn't doing great things today. I think that they're trying very hard to get back to some of their roots, and there's some really great things that they're doing. And I think one of the best things that Blizzard could have possibly done was bring Chris Metzen back a few years ago, and that has been, I think, a very positive thing. He is the heart of Blizzard.
Awesome. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to talk. This has been a really fascinating discussion of the past, but I want to turn it towards the present and the future a little bit. First of all, your role at Certain Affinity is it's different than the remit of your role at Blizzard, obviously, but I'm curious if you apply any of the takeaways from what you've observed at Blizzard and your thoughts on this firewall to your current work.
Yeah. So Certain Affinity, for those of you who don't know, is a developer that is mostly known for doing AAA co-development, a lot of Call of Duty work, a lot of Halo work. We also do lead development work. And we've got what I believe to be a very, very strong bench of incredible developers who have come from these big AAA developers that are first-party studios within the big publishers. And we have a very tenured staff and very capable staff. But just like anywhere else, they're accustomed to feeling those pressures from the parent company or the operational leaders of the company. And one of the things that I really focus on wherever I am is trying to shield them. I really do believe what Alan asked me to do back in '96 when I walked in those doors. Being a human shield for your developers is critical to their success and critical to their focus. If you give great developers the opportunity to focus, and you give them the opportunity to do what they do best and to not feel shackled and not feel constantly pressured by this month's new big business model fad, and let them just do their thing, you can have great results. And so that is definitely something that I try to bring to Certain Affinity. Thankfully, my business partner there, Max, who is the founder and I run the studio with, he has a very similar mentality. That was part of what caused him, I think, to try to pull me out of my state of semi-retirement, because I did not think I'd be an operator again. But I saw things in Certain Affinity that I saw early at Blizzard, and he was able to pull me back in. And I will say that's one of the big things that I think he has seen and the developers have seen at our company, is that I really want to shield them from the stuff that they can't control and let them focus on what they can control. And that's making incredible games and incredible content for our partners and ultimately the players of those games.
One more question for you, and I'm definitely not asking you to talk smack unless you want to, but what is the state of the developer business protections at big game companies in general? I mean, we've talked about Blizzard, and you've opined on how Blizzard is doing some stuff to get back there now. Are there any big game companies, like big corporate game companies, that you think are successfully maintaining this divide, or is that just not the nature of game development at the top levels now?
Well, I think Blizzard was unique in that we were able, through success, to hold all the parent companies and the operational and financial leaders within those corporate organizations at bay. Success empowered us to do what we did on my side of the house. And if we would have not been making great games, no matter how effective of being a human shield I would have taken a bullet that I couldn't stop at some point, right? So it's all a matter of having that success that then allows you to be in that situation. The good news was that in the early years for Blizzard, we had a parent company, it was called Davidson Associates, an educational software company, believe it or not, that understood how special Blizzard was, but didn't know the game business. And so they actually left Blizzard alone to an extent and allowed Blizzard to do what Blizzard did. and create Warcraft Orcs and Humans and Warcraft 2 and Beyond the Dork Portal and Diablo and StarCraft, and to set the company up to be in a position to do what it did later. So that company, Bob and Jan Davidson, I actually worked for Davidson, believe it or not. I was part of the team that acquired Blizzard in 1994. And it was evident the day they walked in that this was a special group. And Bob Davidson, whom they reported to, an older guy that hadn't played a game in his life, other than maybe a board game, he saw what was special in them, and he gave them a runway. I think I was his kind of little protege of sorts, and he wanted me to go down there and work with them, but Alan interviewed the hell out of me, and he decided to have me come. And told me that day when I walked in, besides you're the human shield, he said, your loyalties are here now. They are no longer there. And if I see anything that suggests you aren't loyal to Blizzard first, well, then you won't be here long. And I was like, you are not going to have to worry about that. And so going to your question, there's a lot of really good companies out there. But I also think, whether it's the game industry or other industries, there are traditional ways that business people think about operating. Blizzard operated in a very unorthodox manner, and it worked. And it worked in incredible ways. And it doesn't mean that what the other companies are doing right now is not right. It's different, and a lot of them are having incredible success. But I still think, at the end of the day, the stars of the show are the developers. And no matter what you do, if you want to have success at the level that companies want to have it, you have to prioritize the developers. You have to have the right developers, and you have to empower them to do great things and to not allow them to be distracted and to have their focus spread across a bunch of different things. We worked with the developers all the time, and we gave them all the information that they wanted, but not more than they wanted, because anytime these are all smart people. And so then they want to start looking at it, and then it would become a distraction. And so we worked really hard with our development leadership on what was the right balance. And I think that's what I would say to other publishers and what have you. Even if you're having great success, even if you're doing what you see are great things, you're winning Game of the Years, you have your players that are really engaged, you have players showing up to buy your game the day it comes out. I still think there's a lesson to be learned, and that is you got to put the developers first, because, again, I said it earlier, players are not buying business models. They're not. Who gives a shit, right? It's a matter of, is it a great game? And one of the things I always used to say was, me and my team are not going to ever dictate a business model. It starts with a great game, and then we wrap the business model around the great game based on what's right for the game and right for the players. Business model should never dictate it. And I believe that to this day. It has to be about the game.
Enough said. Give it up for Paul Sams, everybody. Thanks, Paul.